She lived in a cardboard shelter under a bridge in Nairobi, surviving on scraps and rainwater, when a man in an expensive suit found her and said 5 words that changed everything. "You've inherited $50 million. But what happened next wasn't what anyone expected, because the moment her Arab ex-husband, who had abandoned her pregnant and penniless 7 years ago, heard about her fortune, he showed up at her door begging for mercy. This is the story of Zara Mwangi, a woman who went from having nothing to everything, and how money revealed the true nature of everyone around her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 7 years ago, Zara Mwangi was a different person entirely. She lived in a modest apartment in Westlands, Nairobi's upscale district, worked as a marketing coordinator for a tech startup, and was married to the man she thought would be her forever. Khalil Al-Rashid, a charming Arab businessman who had swept her off her feet during a conference in Dubai. Their love story had seemed like something from a fairy tale. Khalil was sophisticated, well-traveled, and spoke about their future with such conviction that Zara believed every word. He told her about the family they would build together, the businesses they would start, the life of comfort and security waiting for them. When he proposed on the rooftop of the Burj Al Arab, overlooking the Persian Gulf, Zara felt like she was living in a dream. The wedding was intimate but elegant, held at a boutique hotel in Karen, surrounded by Zara's family and a few of Khalil's business associates who had flown in from various Middle Eastern cities. Her mother, Grace, had reservations about the marriage from the beginning. "There's something about his eyes," she had whispered to Zara during the reception. "They're calculating, like he's always measuring what he can gain." But Zara dismissed her mother's concerns as traditional worry, convinced that love would conquer any cultural or practical differences. For the first year, their marriage was everything Khalil had promised. He showered Zara with gifts, designer, handbags, expensive jewelry, weekend trips to Zanzibar and the Seychelles. He spoke often about expanding his import-export business to include East African markets and how Zara's local knowledge and connections would be invaluable. She felt useful, cherished, essential to his grand plans, but slowly cracks began to appear in their perfect facade. Khalil became increasingly secretive about his business dealings. Phone calls came at odd hours, always in Arabic, always ending with him leaving the apartment for hours at a time. When Zara asked questions, he would brush them off with charming deflections and promises to explain later. Later never came. The changes were subtle at first. Khalil stopped talking about their future with the same enthusiasm. He became critical of small things. The way Zara dressed for his business dinners, her laugh being too loud in public, her family being too involved in their lives. He began suggesting that maybe she should quit her job to focus on supporting his business ventures, but whenever she asked for specific ways to help, he gave vague responses. Then came the financial irregularities. Bills started arriving that Zara didn't recognize. Credit cards she hadn't applied for, loans she knew nothing about, all somehow connected to her name and identification. When she confronted Khalil about them, he exploded in anger for the first time in their relationship. "You don't trust me," he had shouted, his accent thickening with rage. "I'm trying to build something for us, and you question every decision I make." The fight lasted 3 days. Khalil slept in the guest room, barely spoke to her, and when he finally emerged, it was with an apology so sweet and convincing that Zara almost forgot why she had been angry. He explained that he was under tremendous pressure from investors, that the business was going through a difficult transition, and that he had used her credit to secure some temporary financing. "It's just paperwork," he assured her. "Everything Will be sorted out within a month. But a month passed, then 2, then 3. The bills kept coming, and Khalil's explanations became increasingly creative and desperate. He spoke about deals that were almost closed, payments that were just delayed, investors who were restructuring their timelines. Zara began to realize that she was married to a man she didn't really know. The final blow came when Zara discovered she was pregnant. She had been feeling unwell for weeks, tired, nauseous, emotional in ways that seemed disconnected from the stress of their financial situation. When the pregnancy test showed 2 pink lines, her first emotion was joy. Despite everything, she loved Khalil, and she believed that a baby might bring them back together, give them something beautiful to focus on instead of the mounting problems. She planned the announcement carefully. She cooked his favorite meal, lamb tagine with saffron rice, lit candles, and waited for him to come home from what he said was a crucial business meeting. When he walked through the door at nearly midnight, she could smell perfume on his clothes that wasn't hers, but she pushed the suspicion aside. This news was too important. "Khalil," she said, taking his hands in hers, "we're going to have a baby." The silence that followed was deafening. Khalil stared at her as if she had just told him she had a terminal illness. His face went through a series of expressions: shock, calculation, and finally something that looked disturbingly like disgust. "Are you sure?" he asked, pulling his hands away. "I took 3 tests. I went to the doctor yesterday. I'm 8 weeks pregnant." Khalil sat down heavily on their sofa, his head in his hands. "This changes everything," he muttered. Zara sat beside him, confused by his reaction. "Changes what?" "We've talked about having children. We've planned for this." "We've talked about a lot of things," Khalil said, and his voice had gone cold. "That doesn't mean the timing is right." "The timing is never perfect," Zara replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "But we love each other. We can make this work." Khalil looked at her then with an expression she had never seen before. Complete detachment, as if he was looking at a stranger who had become an inconvenience. "Zara, there are things you don't understand about my situation. Complications that a baby would only make worse." "What complications? What aren't you telling me?" But Khalil had already stood up, was already moving toward their bedroom. "I need to think," he said. "This is not a conversation for tonight. That was the last real conversation they ever had as husband and wife. Over the next 2 weeks, Khalil became a ghost in their own home. He left early, came back late, and when Zara tried to discuss the pregnancy or their future, he found ways to avoid the conversation. He stopped eating her cooking, stopped sleeping in their bed, stopped looking her in the eye. The end came with brutal efficiency. Zara woke up one morning to find Khalil packing a suitcase in their bedroom. Not just clothes for a business trip, but everything. His expensive watches, his documents, his prayer rug, even the wedding photo from their nightstand. "Where are you going?" she asked, though part of her already knew. "I have to leave," he said without looking at her. "There are people I owe money to, people who won't wait much longer. Then we'll figure it out together. We'll sell the apartment. There is no we anymore, Zara." His voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "I can't be married to you. I can't be responsible for a child. I never should have let it get this far." The words hit her like physical blows. Let what get this far? Our marriage, our baby, all of it. He zipped the suitcase closed and finally looked at her. "I'm sorry. I never meant for it to happen like this. You're leaving me, pregnant and alone. I'm leaving Kenya, today. Don't try to find me." And that was it. No explanation about the debts that were in her name, no forwarding address, no promise to send. Money for the baby, nothing. Khalil Al-Rashid walked out of their apartment and out of her life, as if the previous 2 years had been nothing more than a business arrangement that had run its course. The financial devastation that followed was swift and merciless. Within 2 weeks, Zara discovered that Khalil had left her with over $200,000 in debt. Credit cards, personal loans, business loans, even a mortgage on property she had never seen. Her salary couldn't cover even the minimum payments. The apartment was foreclosed on within 3 months. Her car was repossessed. Her bank accounts were frozen. But the financial ruin was nothing compared to the emotional destruction. Zara's morning sickness was severe, made worse by the stress of losing everything she had worked for. She moved back in with her mother initially, but Grace's small pension couldn't support both of them and a coming baby. The shame was overwhelming, having to explain to family and friends that her perfect husband had abandoned her, that she had been so naive as to sign documents she didn't understand, that she was about to become a single mother with no resources. Her former colleagues at the tech startup were sympathetic, but couldn't offer her the old job back. The company was downsizing, and her reputation had been tainted by association with Khalil's business dealings. Other employers were reluctant to hire a visibly pregnant woman with financial problems and gaps in her work history. As her pregnancy progressed, Zara's situation became increasingly desperate. Her mother's health began to fail under the stress, and the small apartment in Westlands became too crowded and tense. Zara made the hardest decision of her life. She moved out to spare her mother the burden, taking nothing but a small bag of clothes and the little money she had left. The streets of Nairobi were unforgiving to a pregnant woman with nowhere to go. Shelters were overcrowded and temporary. Day labor was impossible in her condition. Zara learned to navigate the complex ecosystem of urban poverty, which churches served free meals on which days, where she could wash herself without being hassled, how to make a few shillings last for food and transport. She gave birth to her daughter Amira in a public hospital ward, alone except for the overworked nurses who did their best with limited resources. The baby was healthy and beautiful, with Zara's dark eyes and her father's sharp features, but Zara could barely afford the hospital fees, let alone the necessities a newborn required. The years that followed blurred together in a haze of survival. Zara carried Amira everywhere, trying to find work while caring for a baby, sleeping in different places each night, always one step ahead of complete despair. She sold vegetables on street corners, cleaned offices at night, did whatever she could to keep them both alive. Amira grew from a baby to a toddler, to a bright, curious 6-year-old who accepted their unconventional life with the adaptability of children. She learned to be quiet when they needed to hide, to share whatever food they found, to find joy in simple things like playing with sticks and stones in the small parks where they sometimes spent their days. But Zara never stopped, feeling the weight of what she had lost, what had been taken from her, what her daughter deserved but couldn't have. Every night, as she held Amira close in whatever shelter they had found, she wondered what had become of Khalil Al-Rashid, whether he ever thought about the family he had abandoned, whether he had any idea what his choices had cost them. She could never have imagined that 7 years later, on a rainy Thursday morning, as she sat under the bridge that had become their semi-permanent home, a man in an expensive suit would change everything with 5 simple words. "You've inherited $50 million. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The man in the expensive suit looked completely out of place standing at the edge of the Mathar River Bridge, where Zara and Amira had made their shelter. His polished Oxford shoes were inches away from the muddy cardboard that served as their floor, and his perfectly pressed navy suit seemed to glow against the backdrop of rusted metal and concrete. He held a leather briefcase in one hand and what appeared to be official documents in the other. Zara instinctively pulled 6-year-old Amira closer, her maternal instincts flaring. In 7 years of homelessness, she had learned to be suspicious of anyone who sought them out deliberately. Government officials usually meant trouble. Questions about why Amira wasn't in school regularly, threats to place her in state care, demands for documentation that Zara couldn't provide. Rich-looking strangers often meant worse things. People who saw homeless women as easy targets for exploitation or abuse. "Mrs. Zara Mwangi?" the man asked, his voice carrying a slight British accent that suggested expensive education. "Previously Mrs. Al-Rashid?" The mention of her married name sent ice through Zara's veins. Nobody had called her that in years. She had deliberately avoided using it since Khalil's abandonment, reverting to her maiden name in what few official interactions she'd had. The fact that this stranger knew both names suggested this was about more than charity or social services. "Who's asking?" Zara's voice was hoarse from years of shouting over traffic noise and speaking little except to Amira. The man reached into his jacket pocket slowly, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He pulled out a business card and held it out to her. "My name is David Ochieng, senior partner at Ochieng, Kimani and Associates. I'm here about your great-aunt, Esther Wanjiku." Zara stared at the card without taking it. Great-aunt Esther was a name from her childhood, a legendary figure in family stories, but someone she had never actually met. Her mother had spoken of Esther occasionally, always with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment. Esther had left Kenya in the 1960s, shortly after independence, to seek her fortune abroad. The family had heard rumors over the decades that she had married well in London, that she had started some kind of business, that she had become wealthy, but concrete details were scarce. As far as Zara knew, Esther had never returned to Kenya and had maintained minimal contact with the family. "What about her?" Zara asked, though part of her was already dreading the answer. In her experience, unexpected news about distant relatives usually meant someone was dead and there were debts to be settled. "She passed away 3 months ago in London," David said gently. "I've been searching for you ever since. You're her sole surviving heir." The words hung in the air between them, like something foreign and incomprehensible. Amira looked up at her mother with curious eyes, not understanding the conversation, but sensing its importance. Around them, the normal sounds of the city continued. Traffic, construction, street vendors calling out their wares. But to Zara, everything had gone silent. "That's impossible," she said finally. "I never even met her. She left Kenya before I was born." David nodded as if he had expected this reaction. "Your great-aunt was a remarkable woman, Mrs. Mwangi. She left Kenya with almost nothing in 1963, worked as a seamstress in London's East End, and eventually built a textile empire that spanned 3 continents. She never married, never had children, but she followed the lives of her family members from afar, more closely than anyone realized." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. "She kept detailed records of your family tree, newspaper clippings about family members' achievements, even school photos that relatives had sent over the years. She knew about your marriage to Khalil Al-Rashid, knew about his abandonment, knew about your current situation." Zara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "She knew I was living here, under this bridge?" "She hired a private investigative firm to locate you 6 months ago, when her health began to decline rapidly. She wanted to ensure that her estate would go to someone who would truly appreciate and honor her legacy." David's expression softened. "She specifically chose you, Zara, because of what you've endured and how you've survived it." The lawyer reached into the folder and pulled out a photograph. It showed an elderly African woman with kind eyes and graying hair, standing in front of what appeared to be a large industrial building with Wanjiku Textiles written across the facade. She was wearing a simple but elegant business suit and smiling with quiet confidence. "This was taken last year," David explained. She built all of this from nothing, just like you're trying to do with a mirror." Zara stared at the photograph, trying to find resemblances to her own family. There was something in the woman's jawline that reminded her of her mother, and the way she held herself suggested the same stubborn strength that had kept Zara alive through the worst of times. "Even if this is true," Zara said slowly, "what does it mean? What kind of inheritance are we talking about?" David pulled out another document, this one bearing official seals and signatures. "The estate has been valued at $52 million, Mrs. Mwangi. That includes the textile business, real estate holdings in London, Nairobi, and Johannesburg, investment portfolios, and liquid assets." The number was so large it seemed abstract, meaningless. Zara had spent so many years thinking in terms of shillings and cents, of whether she could afford a loaf of bread or a night in a cheap lodging house, that $50 million might as well have been 50 billion. It was a number that belonged to other people, people who lived in a completely different world. "You're joking," she whispered. "I understand this is overwhelming," David said, "but I assure you this is completely legitimate. I have all the legal documentation here, including your great-aunt's will, which explicitly names you as the sole beneficiary. She also left you a personal letter." He handed her an envelope made of heavy cream-colored paper with her name written, in flowing script across the front. Zara's hands shook as she took it, the paper feeling strangely substantial after years of handling nothing but recycled cardboard and cheap newsprint. "Would you like privacy to read it?" David asked. Zara nodded, unable to speak. David stepped back a respectful distance, and Zara carefully opened the envelope. Inside was several pages of handwriting in the same elegant script, along with a smaller photograph showing a young woman who looked remarkably like Zara herself. "My dear great-niece Zara, if you are reading this letter, then I have passed on, and you have inherited everything I worked my entire life to build. I know this must come as a shock, as we never had the chance to meet in person, but I have watched your life unfold from afar with great interest and admiration. I left Kenya in 1963 with nothing but determination and a small sewing machine that had belonged to my mother. I was young, frightened, and completely alone in a foreign country, but I was determined to build something that would matter, something that would honor the sacrifices of those who came before me. I never married because I never found a man who understood that my ambitions were not a threat to be conquered, but a gift to be supported. I never had children because I devoted every ounce of my energy to building something lasting, something that could benefit future generations of our family. When I learned about your marriage to Khalil Al-Rashid, I was hopeful that you had found the partnership I never did. When I learned about his abandonment and your subsequent struggles, I was heartbroken but not surprised. Men like him see women like us as temporary conveniences, not as equals worthy of respect and loyalty. I have watched you survive 7 years of homelessness while raising your daughter with dignity and love. I have seen how you shield her from the worst of your circumstances while teaching her to find joy in small things. I have observed your quiet strength, your refusal to give up even when giving up would have been easier. You remind me of myself. At your age, Zara, but you have something I never did. A child to love and protect, a reason to build something beyond yourself. That is why I am leaving everything to you. The money and businesses are tools, nothing more. What you do with them will determine whether my life's work has meaning or becomes just another fortune that corrupts and destroys. I trust you to use these resources wisely, to build something beautiful for Amira and for the generations that will come after her. I also trust you to remember where you came from. Never let wealth make you forget the bridge where you are reading this letter, or the strength it took to survive there with your dignity intact. Use that strength to help Others who are still fighting battles like the ones you have fought. There is one more thing, my dear. I know that your former husband is still alive, still conducting business in the Middle East, still accumulating debts and abandoned responsibilities wherever he goes. Men like him always resurface when they smell money, like scavengers drawn to carrion. When he comes, and he will come, remember that you owe him nothing. You survived his abandonment and built a life without him. His desperation is not your responsibility. Be strong, be wise, and be happy. You have earned all three. With love and admiration, your great-aunt Esther Wanjiku P.S. The enclosed photograph is of me at your age, taken shortly after I arrived in London. I thought you might like to see how much we resemble each other. Not just in appearance, but in determination. Zara read the letter 3 times before the words began to feel real. Each reading revealed new layers of meaning, new implications for what her life could become. When she finally looked up, David was watching her with patient understanding. She really knew, Zara said, her voice barely above a whisper. She knew about everything. Your great-aunt was a remarkable woman, David replied. She built her fortune, but she never forgot her roots. The investigative reports she commissioned about your family weren't just about money. They were about connection, about understanding who deserved to carry on her legacy. Amira tugged at her mother's sleeve. Mama, what's happening? Who is this man? Zara looked down at her daughter, this beautiful, resilient child who had known nothing but struggle and uncertainty. And for the first time in 7 years, she saw something different in their future. Not just survival, but possibility. Not just getting by day to day, but building something meaningful and lasting. This man has come to tell us that our lives are about to change, sweetheart, Zara said, pulling Amira close. We're going to have a home again. A real home. David smiled and opened his briefcase again. There are legal procedures we need to complete, documents to sign, accounts to establish. But I can arrange for immediate housing and living expenses while we work through the paperwork. You and Amira never have to spend another night under this bridge. As if on cue, it began to rain, the kind of sudden, heavy downpour that had soaked them countless times over the years. But instead of scrambling to protect their few possessions and find better shelter, Zara stood up slowly, Esther's letter still clutched in her hand, and let the rain wash over her face. For the first time, in 7 years, Zara Mwangi was not afraid of the rain. She was not afraid of tomorrow or next week or next year. She was not afraid of what would happen to Amira if something happened to her, or where they would sleep or how they would eat. But somewhere in the back of her mind, she remembered Esther's warning about scavengers drawn to carrion, and she wondered how long it would be before Khalil Al-Rashid learned that his abandoned wife had become one of the wealthiest women in East Africa. The rain continued to fall, but for the first time in her adult life, Zara was not seeking shelter from it. She was standing in it by choice, transformed, and ready for whatever came next. The Fairmont Norfolk Hotel had always been a distant landmark in Zara's mental map of Nairobi, a place she walked past during her years of street survival, but never imagined entering. Now, sitting in the opulent lobby with Amira beside her, both of them wearing new clothes that still had store tags attached, she felt like an imposter in someone else's dream. David Ochieng had moved quickly once the initial shock of the inheritance revelation had worn off. Within hours of their meeting under the bridge, he had arranged temporary accommodation, opened emergency bank accounts, and scheduled appointments with financial advisors, tax attorneys, and business managers. The speed at which money could solve problems that had seemed insurmountable was almost frightening. Mrs. Mwangi, David said, approaching their table in the hotel restaurant with a manila folder thick with documents. I've just finished speaking with the probate court in London. The preliminary paperwork has been approved. As of this morning, you have access to the first installment of liquid assets, approximately $2 million to cover immediate needs, while we complete the full estate transfer. $2 million for immediate needs. Zara had to suppress a hysterical laugh. 7 hours ago, she had been counting coins to see if she could afford a packet of milk for Amira's breakfast. Now she was being told that $2 million was pocket money while they waited for the real inheritance to be processed. Amira was fascinated by everything around them. The crystal chandeliers, the uniformed waiters, the elaborate flower. Arrangements that probably cost more than Zara used to spend on food in a month. But what struck Zara most was how quickly her daughter adapted to the new circumstances. Children were remarkably resilient, but Amira's ease in this new environment also reminded Zara how much her daughter had been denied, how many experiences and opportunities had been lost to their years of poverty. There's something else we need to discuss, David continued, lowering his voice slightly. Your great-aunt's business empire is substantial, but it's also complex. The textile company operates in 12 countries, employs over 3,000 people, and requires active management. You'll need to decide whether you want to take an active role in running the businesses or appoint trustees to handle operations while you receive the profits. The enormity of the responsibility was overwhelming. Zara had managed marketing campaigns for a small tech startup, but that experience felt laughably inadequate when compared to overseeing a multinational corporation. Yet something in Esther's letter had suggested that this inheritance came with expectations, not just privileges. What did my great-aunt want? Zara asked. Did she leave any instructions about how she expected me to handle the businesses? David smiled. Actually, yes. She was very specific about that. He opened the folder and pulled out a bound document. She created what she called the Wanjiku Foundation, a detailed plan for how she wanted her business empire to evolve under your leadership. She didn't expect you to become a textile expert overnight, but she did expect you to honor certain principles. He handed her the document, and Zara was struck by the elaborate care that had gone into its preparation. The cover bore the same elegant script she had seen in Esther's letter, and inside were detailed organizational charts, financial projections, and what appeared to be a comprehensive guide to ethical business practices. She believed that businesses should serve communities, not just shareholders, David explained. The Wanjiku companies have always prioritized fair wages, worker safety, and environmental responsibility, even when it meant lower profits. She wanted to ensure that tradition continued. As Zara flipped through the pages, she began to see a vision that extended far beyond personal wealth. Esther had outlined plans for expansion into sustainable materials, partnerships with women's cooperatives across Africa, educational programs for workers' children, and healthcare initiatives for company employees and their families. It was less like a business plan and more like a blueprint for social change disguised as capitalism. This is incredible, Zara murmured, reading about proposed micro-lending programs and renewable energy initiatives. She really thought of everything. Your great-aunt spent the last 5 years of her life preparing for this transition, David said. She knew she needed an heir who would understand the difference between having money and using money responsibly. That's why she chose you. A commotion near the hotel entrance interrupted their conversation. Zara looked up to see a woman in an expensive business suit arguing with the hotel security. The woman was gesticulating wildly, speaking in rapid Arabic, and pointing in their direction. Even from across the lobby, Zara could see the desperation in her movements. Mrs. Mwangi, one of the security guards, approached their table. There's a woman asking to speak with you. She claims to know you, but she's not on your approved visitor list. Zara's blood chilled. An Arabic-speaking woman looking for her could only mean one thing. Somehow, word of her inheritance had already reached Khalil's circle. She had hoped for more time to prepare, to figure out how to handle the inevitable contact from her past. "What's her name?" Zara asked, though she was already dreading the answer. "She says her name is Khalil Al-Rashid. She claims to be your former sister-in-law." The name hit Zara like a physical blow. Layla was Khalil's younger sister, someone Zara had genuinely liked during her marriage. Layla had been kind to her, had seemed to approve of the marriage, and had been one of the few people in Khalil's family who had treated Zara as an equal, rather than an exotic acquisition. If Layla was here, it meant the situation was serious. "Should I have security remove her?" David asked, clearly sensing Zara's distress. Zara looked at Amira, who was still marveling at the elaborate dessert menu, blissfully unaware of the tension. Part of her wanted to say yes, to have Layla escorted away, and pretend that this confrontation could be delayed indefinitely. But Esther's letter had warned that scavengers would come, and running from them would only postpone the inevitable. "No," Zara said finally, "but I want you present during the conversation, and I want hotel security nearby." "Of course. Would you prefer to meet in a private conference room?" "Yes." "Amira, sweetheart, can you stay here with the nice lady from the hotel activities desk? She was going to show you the swimming pool, remember?" Amira nodded eagerly, and within minutes, David had arranged for supervised childcare while Zara prepared to face her past. The conference room was elegantly appointed but sterile, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Layla was already seated when they entered, and Zara was struck by how much older she looked. The vivacious young woman who had laughed at family dinners and helped Zara navigate Arab cultural customs had been replaced by someone who looked harried, desperate, and much older than her 32 years. "Zara!" Layla stood up quickly, her hands trembling slightly. "Thank God I found you. I've been searching everywhere." "Hello, Layla." Zara's voice was cooler than she had intended, but seeing Khalil's sister brought back too many painful memories. "This is my attorney, David Ochieng. He'll be staying for our conversation." Layla glanced nervously at David, clearly uncomfortable with the formal atmosphere. "Zara, I know this is awkward, but I need to talk to you about Khalil, about what happened after he left Kenya." "I'm not interested in hearing about Khalil," Zara said firmly. "He made his choices 7 years ago. I've moved on." "But you don't understand," Layla said, her voice rising with panic. "He's in trouble, serious trouble, the kind that could get him killed." Despite herself, Zara felt a flicker of concern. Whatever Khalil had done to her, she didn't wish him dead. But she also wasn't about to let guilt or residual feelings manipulate her into solving problems he had created. "What kind of trouble?" David asked, his lawyer instincts engaging. Layla looked between them, clearly calculating how much to reveal. "After he left Kenya, Khalil tried to start over in Dubai. He used the money he had taken from your accounts to fund a business venture, but he got involved with the wrong people, investors connected to some very dangerous organizations." She paused, wrapping her arms around herself as if she were cold. The business failed, badly, and when it did, Khalil couldn't repay what he owed. These aren't the kind of people who accept bankruptcy or excuses. They want their money, plus interest, plus penalties for the delay. "How much does he owe?" David asked. $8 million, Layla whispered, "and they've given him 6 months to pay it back. That was 4 months ago." The number hung in the air like a challenge. $8 million, a fortune by any normal standard, but less than 20% of Zara's new inheritance. She could pay off Khalil's debts without even noticing the impact on her wealth. The realization was both empowering and terrifying. "Why are you telling me this?" Zara asked. "Because he knows," Layla said simply. "About the inheritance. Word travels fast in certain circles, especially when amounts like $50 million are involved. He knows you could save him, and he sent you here to ask me to do it." Layla's silence was answer enough. Zara stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling city where she had spent 7 years as one of its invisible, forgotten residents. Somewhere out there was the bridge where she had learned that her life was about to change completely. The distance between that bridge and this conference room felt like more than geography. It felt like different universes entirely. "Did he ask about Amira?" she said without turning around. "What? His daughter. Did he ask about his daughter when he sent you to beg for money?" Another silence, longer this time. "He doesn't know about her," Layla admitted quietly. Zara turned around, her eyes blazing. "He doesn't know he has a daughter. Zara, you have to understand, when he left Kenya he was panicked, desperate. He thought he was protecting you by disappearing completely. He never looked back because he thought looking back would only make things worse. He thought abandoning his pregnant wife was protecting her. He was scared. He made terrible decisions. But he has had 7 years to check on me. 7 years to find out whether his child was born alive or dead, whether I survived or died in poverty. He chose not to know." David cleared his throat gently. "Mrs. Mwangi, what would you like me to tell Ms. Al-Rashid?" Zara looked at Layla, this woman who had once been like a sister to her, who was now reduced to begging on behalf of a brother who had never bothered to check whether his family had survived his abandonment. "Tell her that I need time to think," Zara said finally. "And tell her that if Khalil wants to discuss this further, he can come and ask me himself. I won't communicate through intermediaries anymore." Layla's face crumpled with relief and fear in equal measure. "Zara, thank you. I know this is hard, but I haven't agreed to anything." Zara cut her off. "I said I need time to think. And, Layla, when you talk to your brother, you can tell him that he has a 6-year-old daughter named Amira, who is beautiful and brilliant, and has never asked why her father doesn't love her. Yet." The words hit their mark. Layla paled, understanding the full weight of what she was asking Zara to do, not just to save Khalil's life, but to do it while he remained willfully ignorant of the child he had abandoned. After Layla left, Zara sat, alone in the conference room with David, staring at her reflection in the polished table surface. "What are you thinking?" David asked gently. "I'm thinking that my great-aunt was right about scavengers," Zara replied. "But I'm also thinking that I'm not the same person Khalil abandoned 7 years ago. I'm not helpless anymore. I'm not desperate. And I'm certainly not grateful for his attention." She stood up, straightening her shoulders with a confidence that surprised even her. "I want to see Esther's businesses," she said, "all of them. I want to understand exactly what I've inherited and how I can use it. Because if Khalil wants to come begging for mercy, he's going to find out that the woman he abandoned has become someone he never imagined she could be." As they left the conference room, Zara felt the weight of transformation settling around her like armor. She was no longer just a homeless woman who had gotten lucky. She was becoming someone with power, with choices, with the ability to decide who deserved mercy and who needed to face the consequences of their actions. The real test was about to begin. The Wanjiku Textiles headquarters in Nairobi's Westlands district was nothing like Zara had imagined. From the outside, it looked like any other modern office building, glass and steel reaching toward the sky, with the company logo displayed discreetly near the entrance. But as David led her through the security checkpoint and into the elevator, Zara began to understand that this was no ordinary business operation. "Your great-aunt believed that how you treat your employees reflects who you are as a person," David explained as they rose to the 15th floor. "Wait until you see what she built here." The elevator doors opened onto what looked more like a community center than a corporate office. The reception area featured comfortable seating arrangements around a coffee station that offered free refreshments to employees and visitors alike. Children's artwork covered one wall, drawings from the company daycare center that operated on the third floor. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, Zara could see an outdoor terrace where employees were eating lunch at picnic tables surrounded by carefully tended gardens. "Mama, look at all the colors!" Amira exclaimed, pointing to the vibrant textile samples displayed in illuminated cases throughout the lobby. The fabrics showcased traditional African patterns alongside contemporary designs, each piece labeled with information about the artisans who had created it and the communities where the materials were sourced. Margaret Nyong'o, the company's managing director, approached them with a warm smile. She was a woman in her early 50s, with graying hair pulled back in an elegant bun and wearing a dress made from one of the company's signature fabrics, a stunning pattern that combined traditional Maasai beadwork motifs with modern geometric designs. "Mrs. Mwangi," Margaret said, extending her hand, "I cannot tell you how honored we are to finally meet you. Your great-aunt spoke of you often, especially in her final months." "She talked about me?" Zara asked, surprised. "But we never met." Esther Wanjiku was a woman who believed that family connections transcended physical proximity, Margaret replied. "She followed your life closely and spoke with great pride about your resilience and strength. She often said that survival with dignity was the most difficult form of success to achieve." As they toured the facility, Zara began to understand the scope of what she had inherited. This wasn't just a textile company. It was a carefully constructed ecosystem designed to support entire communities. The manufacturing floor employed over 400 people, with wages significantly above industry standards and benefits that included healthcare, education allowances for workers' children, and retirement savings plans. "Your great-aunt implemented profit sharing 20 years ago," Margaret explained, as they watched workers operating state-of-the-art equipment in a spotlessly clean and well-ventilated environment. "Every employee receives quarterly bonuses based on company performance. Last year, our most senior seamstresses earned more than many university graduates in other industries." They visited the design studio, where a team of young Kenyan artists worked alongside experienced textile designers to create patterns that honored traditional techniques while appealing to international markets. Zara watched a young woman about her own age carefully hand-painting a design that would later be transformed into fabric for a European fashion house. "This is Wanjiru," Margaret said, introducing the artist. "She started here as an intern 5 years ago. Your great-aunt personally mentored her, and now her designs are featured in collections from Paris to New York." Wanjiru looked up from her work, paint still wet on her fingertips. "Mrs. Wanjiku always said that when you lift up one person, you create ripples that can transform entire communities. I use my salary to support my 3 younger siblings through university. My success becomes their opportunity, which becomes opportunity for their future families." The philosophy behind Esther's business model was becoming clear to Zara. This wasn't charity disguised as capitalism. It was capitalism redesigned to serve human dignity. Every decision seemed to be filtered through a simple question: how can this create the most good for the most people while still maintaining profitability? They toured the company daycare center, where employees' children received free childcare and early education. Amira was immediately fascinated by the playground equipment and educational toys, and Zara felt a pang of grief for all the years her daughter had missed experiences like this. Safe, supervised play with other children in a clean, nurturing environment The daycare serves 200 children, Margaret explained. We also have an after-school program that provides tutoring and homework help for older children. Many of our employees are single mothers, and your great-aunt understood that supporting workers means supporting their entire families. In the company medical clinic, a full-time nurse and visiting doctor provided free healthcare to all employees and their families. The pharmacy was stocked with essential medications, and the clinic offered everything from routine checkups to prenatal care. We lose almost no employees to preventable illnesses, the nurse explained. When people have access to health care, they're more productive, more loyal, and more able to plan for their futures. But it was the education center that truly took Zara's breath away. The top floor of the building housed classrooms where employees could take evening courses in everything from basic literacy to advanced business management. Computers lined one wall, offering free internet access and digital literacy training. A well-stocked library featured books in English, Swahili, and several local languages. Your great-aunt believed that education was the most powerful tool for breaking cycles of poverty, Margaret said, as they watched a class of adult learners practicing English conversation. We've had employees earn university degrees while working, here start their own businesses, even run for political office. She used to say that investing in people's minds was the best return on investment she ever achieved. Zara sat in on part of a financial literacy class where workers were learning about savings, investments, and entrepreneurship. The instructor was a former employee who had used the education provided by the company to start her own successful consulting business. Mrs. Mwangi didn't just give us jobs, the instructor explained to her students. She gave us tools to build our own prosperity. That's what real empowerment looks like, not dependence, but independence. As the day progressed, Zara began to see herself not just as an inheritor of wealth, but as a steward of a vision that extended far beyond profit margins. The responsibility was overwhelming, but it was also inspiring. Every employee she met had a story of transformation. Lives improved, families lifted out of poverty, dreams made possible through access to fair wages and education. During lunch in the executive dining room, which was actually just an extension of the regular employee cafeteria with no special privileges, Margaret pulled out financial reports that showed the company's performance over the past decade. We consistently outperform our competitors, she said, pointing to growth charts and profit margins. Your great-aunt proved that treating people well isn't just morally right, it's good business. Our employee retention rate is over 90%. Our quality standards are among the highest in the industry, and our reputation for ethical practices has made us the preferred partner for major international brands. The numbers were impressive, but what struck Zara most was the sustainability of the model. This wasn't a charity that would collapse without constant donations. It was a thriving business that generated wealth while creating positive social impact. What happens now? Zara asked. With me taking over, I mean. I don't know anything about running a textile company. Margaret smiled. Your great-aunt anticipated that concern. She created a comprehensive transition plan that includes mentorship, training programs, and gradual assumption of responsibilities. You don't need to become an expert overnight. You need to become a leader who understands the values that drive our decisions. They spent the afternoon reviewing the transition plan, which was as thoughtful and detailed as everything else Esther had created. There were schedules for learning about different aspects of the business, meetings with key managers and department heads, visits to production facilities in other countries, and intensive courses in business management and ethical leadership. Your great-aunt also established something she called the Wisdom Council, Margaret explained. 5 experienced business leaders who will advise you during your first 2 years. They include former executives from other successful social enterprises, an expert in international trade law, and a specialist in sustainable business practices. As they prepared to leave the headquarters, Zara's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The message was in Arabic, but David quickly translated it for her. "It's from Khalil," he said quietly. "He says he's flying to Nairobi tomorrow and wants to meet with you personally." The message felt like cold water poured over the warmth of the day's discoveries. Zara had spent hours learning about a business empire built on principles of dignity, fairness, and mutual respect. Now she was being reminded that her past included someone who had violated all of those principles in his treatment of her. "What do you want to do?" Margaret asked, having overheard the conversation. Zara looked around the lobby one more time, taking in the children's artwork, the happy faces of employees heading home after a productive day, the sense of community and purpose that permeated everything about this place. "I want to meet with him," she said finally, "but not as the desperate woman he abandoned. I want him to see what I've become, what I'm now capable of building and protecting." She turned to David. "Schedule the meeting for tomorrow afternoon. Here, in the boardroom. I want him to see exactly what he walked away from when he decided I wasn't worth fighting for." Margaret nodded approvingly. "Your great-aunt would be proud. She always said that the best revenge against those who underestimate you is to prove them spectacularly wrong." As they left the building, Amira fell asleep in the car, exhausted from a day of new experiences and overstimulation. Zara watched her daughter's peaceful face and thought about the future that was now possible for her: good schools, safe neighborhoods, opportunities to develop her talents and pursue her dreams. But she also thought about the meeting tomorrow, about facing the man who had abandoned them both without a second thought. She was no longer the desperate, pregnant woman he had left behind. She was now someone with resources, with power, with the ability to help him or destroy him. The question was, what kind of person did she want to be with that power? Tomorrow she would find out. Khalil Al-Rashid stepped out of the black Mercedes at exactly 3 p.m., his Italian leather shoes touching the pavement of the Wanjiku Textiles parking lot with the same confident precision that had once made Zara's heart race. 7 years had changed him. His hair was graying at the temples, lines of stress mapped across his face, and his expensive suit couldn't quite hide the weight he had lost. But his posture remained the same, shoulders back, chin raised, moving through the world as if it owed him something. From the 15th floor boardroom window, Zara watched him examine the building's exterior with the calculating gaze of someone assessing an asset's value. She had positioned herself deliberately, standing behind the polished conference table in a tailored navy dress that Margaret had helped her select, her hair professionally styled, wearing jewelry that had belonged to Esther. She wanted him to see her power before he heard her voice. David stood beside her, along with Margaret and 2 other senior executives who had insisted on being present for what they diplomatically called this sensitive business meeting. Behind them, floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the bustling activity of the company's operation. Trucks loading finished textiles for export, employees moving with purpose through the courtyards, the tangible evidence of an empire built on principles Khalil had never understood. "He looks nervous," Margaret observed quietly. "Good," Zara replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "He should be." The elevator chimed softly, and moments later, the boardroom doors opened. Khalil entered with the same theatrical confidence he had always used to dominate rooms, but Zara could see the micro-expressions that betrayed his anxiety. The slight tension around his eyes, the way his fingers moved restlessly against his briefcase, the forced quality of his smile. He stopped short when he saw her, clearly unprepared for the transformation. The last time they had been in the same room, she had been pregnant, vulnerable, begging him not to leave. Now she stood at the head of a conference table in a boardroom that commanded a panoramic view of Nairobi, surrounded by advisors, radiating the quiet authority that came with controlling $50 million. "Zara," he said, and for the first time in their relationship, his voice carried uncertainty. "You look well." "I am well," she replied, not moving from her position. "Mr. Al-Rashid, please have a seat." The formal address hit its mark. His eyebrows raised slightly at being relegated to last-name status, but he sat in the chair across from her, placing the entire width of the conference table between them like a negotiating barrier. "I understand you've had some remarkable changes in your circumstances," Khalil said, attempting to regain his footing with the charm that had once worked so effectively on her. "I'm happy for you. You deserve good fortune." "Do I?" Zara's tone was neutral, conversational. "Because 7 years ago you seemed to believe I deserved something quite different." Khalil glanced at the other people in the room, clearly uncomfortable with the audience. "Perhaps we could speak privately." "No," Zara said simply. "These are my advisors. They stay." It was a power move that would have been impossible for the old Zara, the woman who had always deferred to his preferences, who had accommodated his comfort at the expense of her own dignity. The new Zara had learned that power meant never having to explain or justify your decisions to people who had forfeited the right to your consideration. Khalil cleared his throat and opened his briefcase, pulling out a folder that looked suspiciously formal. "Zara, I know this is awkward, but I need to discuss something important with you, something that affects both of us." "I'm listening." "I'm sure Layla told you about my current situation, the business difficulties I've been facing." He paused, waiting for her to offer sympathy or reassurance. When none came, he continued, "I've made some mistakes in my investments, trusted the wrong people. The amount I owe is substantial, and the individuals involved are not patient creditors." $8 million, Zara said flatly, "and you have 2 months left to pay it." His surprise at her knowledge of the specifics was evident. "Yes, exactly." He leaned forward slightly, and Zara recognized the expression. It was the same look he had worn when proposing, when convincing her to sign financial documents she didn't understand, when manipulating her emotions to achieve his goals. "Zara, I know I have no right to ask you for anything. I know I hurt you badly when I left, when you abandoned your pregnant wife," she corrected quietly. "Yes, when I abandoned you. It was the worst decision I've ever made, and I've regretted it every day since." The lie came so easily, so smoothly, that Zara almost admired its craftsmanship. If she hadn't spent 7 years learning to read people's true intentions, a survival skill developed on the streets, she might have believed him. "Have you?" she asked. "Regretted it every day?" "Of course. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. Then why didn't you ever try to find me?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Khalil's face cycled through expressions as he searched for an answer that wouldn't damn him completely. I believed that you would be better off without me, that my problems would only hurt you more." "So you never once, in 7 years, tried to discover whether I was alive or dead?" "Zara, please understand. Whether the child you left me carrying survived birth." Khalil went very still. "Child?" The word came out as barely a whisper, and for the first time since he had entered the room, Zara saw genuine emotion cross his face. Not love, not joy, but something closer to panic. "You have a daughter," Zara said, her voice steady as granite. "Her name is Amira. She's 6 years old, brilliant, beautiful, and until yesterday she had never had a proper home because her father decided we weren't worth the inconvenience of responsibility." Khalil's face had gone pale. I didn't know. Because you chose not to know. You chose to disappear completely rather than face the consequences of your actions. David cleared his throat gently. Mr. Al-Rashid, Mrs. Mwangi has a very busy schedule. Perhaps you could explain the specific purpose of this meeting. Khalil looked between them, clearly struggling to process the revelation about Amira while simultaneously trying to salvage his primary mission. I need help, he said finally, the charm cracking to reveal desperation underneath. I need $8 million or I'm going to die. These people don't make empty threats, and you came to ask your abandoned wife to save your life. You're the only person I know who has access to that kind of money. The honesty was startling in its selfishness. Not I came because I realized I love you, or I came because I want to make amends for my mistakes. Simply, you have money, and I need money. Therefore, you should give me money. Zara walked to the window, looking down at the courtyard where Amira was playing in the company daycare center under the supervision of trained childcare workers. Her daughter was laughing, running around with other children, experiencing the kind of carefree childhood that had been impossible during their years of homelessness. Do you want to meet her? Zara asked without turning around. What? Your daughter, she's downstairs right now. Do you want to meet Amira? The silence stretched long enough that Zara turned to look at him. Khalil was staring at his hands, his face a mask of conflicted emotions. Yes, of course. But Zara, the situation I'm in is more important than meeting your child. It's not that it's more important. It's that if I don't solve this problem, there won't be time for anything else. Zara returned to her seat, but this time she sat down, bringing herself to eye level with him across the table. Let me tell you what the last 7 years have been like, Khalil. Let me tell you about giving birth alone in a public hospital, about living under bridges, about watching our daughter play with garbage because we couldn't afford toys. Zara, please. Let me tell you about the nights I held her while she cried from hunger, about explaining to a 3-year-old why we couldn't go home because we didn't have one, about the terror of wondering what would happen to her if something happened to me. Khalil's discomfort was palpable, but Zara continued relentlessly. Let me tell you about the shame of begging for work while carrying a baby, about people looking at us like we were diseased, about the constant fear that social services would take her away from me because I couldn't provide what she needed. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. No, you're not. You're sorry that your current problems have forced you to confront the consequences of your past decisions. You're sorry that you need something from me now, but you're not sorry about what you did to us. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Because if you were truly sorry, Khalil, you would have asked about Amira before. You asked for money. The truth of the statement hit him visibly. He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it, recognizing that any defense would only prove her point. Margaret placed a manila folder on the table in front of Zara. Mrs. Mwangi, you asked me to prepare some documents for this meeting. Zara opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. This is a bank draft for $8 million, she said, sliding it across the table to Khalil. More than enough to pay your debts and start over somewhere else. Khalil's eyes widened as he stared at the check. His hands trembled slightly. As he reached for it, relief flooding his features. However, Zara continued, and her voice stopped his hand mid-reach. There are conditions. What conditions? You take this money and you disappear from our lives permanently. You sign legal documents renouncing any claim to parental rights regarding Amira. You agree never to contact either of us again, directly or indirectly. Khalil stared at her, clearly struggling to process the offer. You're buying me out of my own daughter's life? I'm offering you exactly what you chose 7 years ago, a life without the responsibility of a family. The only difference is that now you won't have to abandon us. You can simply accept that we were never part of your world. And if I refuse, then you leave here with nothing, and whatever happens to you happens. Your debts, your problems, your choices, your consequences. The room fell silent, except for the soft hum of air conditioning and the distant sounds of the city below. Khalil stared at the check, then at Zara, then back at the check. "I need time to think," he said finally. "You have until tomorrow morning," Zara replied, standing up. "After that, the offer is withdrawn." As Khalil gathered his papers and prepared to leave, he paused at the door. Would it be possible to see her? Just once." Zara looked at him for a long moment. This man who had once been her entire world and was now essentially a stranger begging for favors. "She's never asked about you," Zara said quietly. "In 6 years, she has never once asked why her father doesn't love her. Do you know what a gift that is? What a blessing it is to have a child who feels so secure in her mother's love that she doesn't feel the absence of anyone else." Khalil said nothing. "If you take that money and disappear, she can keep that gift. If you stay, if you try to be a part of her life, you'll have to explain to a 6-year-old why you abandoned her when she needed you most. You'll have to face her questions about where you've been, why you left, whether you'll leave again." She moved closer to him, close enough to see the fear in his eyes. "Are you prepared for that conversation, Khalil? Are you prepared to be the kind of father a child deserves, or are you just prepared to be the kind of father who shows up when it's convenient?" Without waiting for his answer, she turned back to her advisors. "David, please escort Mr. Al-Rashid to his car. Margaret, let's review the quarterly reports from the London office." As the door closed behind him, Zara felt something she hadn't expected, not satisfaction, not revenge, but a profound sense of completion. She had offered Khalil exactly what he had always wanted, an escape from responsibility with enough money to make it comfortable. Now she would find out what kind of man he truly was. The phone rang at 6:47 a.m., jarring Zara from the first peaceful sleep she'd had in weeks. She had been dreaming about Esther, a strange, vivid dream where her great-aunt was teaching her to weave on an enormous loom, the threads representing the lives of all the people connected to the Wanjiku Empire. "Every thread matters," Dream Esther had said, "but some threads will try to unravel the whole tapestry." "Mrs. Mwangi." David's voice was tight with urgency. "Khalil never returned to his hotel last night. Hotel security says he received multiple phone calls between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., all from international numbers. The last call lasted 47 minutes. Zara sat up in the king-sized bed of her new penthouse apartment, looking out at the Nairobi skyline, bathed in early morning light. Amira was still sleeping in the adjoining room, exhausted from her first day at the prestigious international school that would become her new academic home. "What does that mean?" Zara asked, though part of her already knew. "It means his creditors found out he was in Nairobi. Someone talked, probably Layla, intentionally or not. These aren't the kind of people who wait for scheduled payments when they know their debtor is sitting across from $50 million. The implications hit Zara like a physical force. Khalil's desperation hadn't been theoretical. It was immediate, dangerous, and now potentially spilling over into her carefully constructed new life. Where is he now? Unknown. But there's something else. I've been monitoring international wire transfers as a security precaution, and someone attempted to access your accounts at 3:17 a.m. using forged documents that included your marriage certificate. To Khalil. Zara felt her blood chill. Are you saying he tried to steal from me? I'm saying someone did. The attempt was blocked, but it means people know about your inheritance. They know about the connection to Khalil, and they're desperate enough to attempt fraud. Within an hour, Zara was back in the Wanjiku Textiles boardroom. But this time, the atmosphere was entirely different. Margaret had arrived with the company's security chief, a stern Kenyan woman named Joyce, who had 20 years of experience in corporate protection. David had brought a cybersecurity expert and a private investigator who specialized in international financial crimes. "This is what we know," Joyce began, spreading photographs and documents across the conference table. "Khalil Al-Rashid owes money to a Syrian organization that operates in Dubai, Beirut, and London. They're involved in legitimate businesses, construction, import-export, real estate, but their collection methods are decidedly old-fashioned." She pointed to surveillance photos showing Khalil entering and leaving various buildings in Dubai. "These people don't just want their money back. They want interest, penalties, and public examples of what happens to people who default on obligations." "What kind of examples?" Zara asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "Last year, a Lebanese businessman who owed them $12 million disappeared for 6 months. When he surfaced, he was in a wheelchair. His family had fled the country, and his businesses had been systematically destroyed. He paid what he owed, plus an additional $5 million in inconvenience fees." The private investigator, a middle-aged British man named Harrison, pulled out his laptop and showed them a series of financial tracking reports. "Here's what's particularly interesting about your ex-husband's situation. The original debt was $2 million, a failed investment in a textile importing business, ironically enough. But over 4 years of missed payments, penalties, and compounding interest, it's grown to $8 million. So he really does need that much," Zara said. "He did yesterday. Today, the amount is probably higher. These organizations add fees for every day of delay, every inconvenience, every expense they incur while pursuing payment." Margaret leaned forward, her expression grave. "Zara, the question we need to answer is whether Khalil's problems can become your problems. Can these people threaten you or Amira to pressure him into payment?" "They can try," Joyce said bluntly. "You're now a public figure whether you wanted to be or not. Your inheritance made international news in business publications. Your connection to Khalil is a matter of public record through marriage certificates. If they can't find him, they might decide that pressuring his wealthy ex-wife is an acceptable alternative." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Zara had thought that offering Khalil the money would resolve the situation cleanly. Either he would take it and disappear, or he would refuse it and face his consequences elsewhere. She hadn't considered that his creditors might view her wealth as an extension of his available resources. "What are our options?" she asked. David pulled out a legal pad covered with notes. "Option 1. We do nothing. We maintain that you have no legal obligation to pay Khalil's debts. We increase security around you and Amira, and we wait to see what happens. Option 2. We proactively contact Khalil's creditors and negotiate a resolution. We make it clear that while you're willing to help end this situation, any threats against you or your daughter will result in complete non-cooperation and legal action." "Option 3, Harrison added. "We help Khalil disappear completely. New identity, relocation to a country with no extradition treaties, enough money to start over where these people can't find him. And option 4, Joyce concluded grimly, we eliminate the problem entirely by ensuring these creditors understand that pursuing you would be more expensive than writing off Khalil's debt." Zara stared at the conference table, overwhelmed by the complexity of choices she had never wanted to make. Yesterday, she had been focused on building schools and supporting communities through Esther's business empire. Today, she was discussing international criminals and potentially violent confrontations. "I need to think," she said. "But first, I need to know where Khalil is." The answer came 2 hours later in the form of a video message sent to Zara's personal phone. The video was clearly recorded in some kind of warehouse, concrete floors, bare walls, harsh fluorescent lighting. Khalil sat in a metal chair, his expensive suit wrinkled and torn, his face bearing fresh bruises. "Zara," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "I hope you received this message. The people I told you about, they found me last night. They know about your inheritance, and they know about our marriage." Behind him, a man's voice spoke in Arabic. Khalil nodded and continued, "They want to meet with you directly. They say that since we were married when I incurred these debts, you have a moral obligation to honor them. They're willing to negotiate the amount, but they want to deal with you now, not me." Another exchange in Arabic, and Khalil's face paled. "Further, they've given you 24 hours to respond. If you agree to meet, they'll release me and we can resolve this situation. If you don't—" He paused, clearly struggling with the words. "They say they'll make sure everyone knows that the wealthy African businesswoman who inherited $50 million refused to save her husband's life for less than 20% of her fortune." The video ended abruptly, leaving Zara staring at her phone screen in shock. "They're trying to manipulate you," Margaret said immediately, "using guilt, public pressure, and threats to force your cooperation. But they also have Khalil," David pointed out. "Whatever we think of him personally, allowing him to be harmed could create legal and ethical complications." Joyce was already on her phone, speaking rapidly in Swahili to someone about security arrangements. When she hung up, her expression was all business. "We need to make a decision quickly," she said. "Every hour we delay gives them more time to plan, more leverage to use against us, and more opportunity to escalate the situation." Zara walked to the window again, looking down at the daycare center where Amira was playing with her new friends. Her daughter had no idea that her absent father's mistakes were now threatening the security they had just found. She had no idea that the mother who had protected her through 7 years of homelessness was now facing a different kind of danger entirely. "What would Esther do?" Zara asked quietly. Margaret joined her at the window. "Your great-aunt believed that bullies only understand strength, but she also believed that strength without wisdom was just another form of bullying." Meaning? Meaning she would find a way to resolve this that protected innocent people while making it clear that threatening her family was unacceptable. Zara's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "The warehouse on Industrial Road. Midnight tonight. Come alone or don't come at all." She showed the message to the others, watching their faces cycle through expressions of concern, anger, and determination. "I'm going," Zara said quietly. "Absolutely not," David protested immediately. "Meeting with kidnappers is exactly what someone with real power would do," Zara interrupted. "These people think they can intimidate me because they see me as Khalil's helpless wife. They think I'm someone who can be frightened into paying for his mistakes." She turned away from the window, her jaw set with determination. "They're about to learn that I'm not the woman they think I am. I'm not someone who hides behind lawyers and security guards when my family is threatened. I'm someone who builds empires and protects what matters." Joyce nodded slowly. "If you're determined to do this, we do it right. Surveillance, backup plans, legal protections, and enough firepower to ensure you're negotiating from a position of strength." "What about Khalil?" Harrison asked. Zara considered the question for a long moment, thinking about the man who had abandoned her when she needed him most, who had never asked about his daughter, who was now inadvertently threatening the safety and security she had worked so hard to build for Amira. "Khalil made his choices," she said finally. "Now I get to make mine." As the sun set over Nairobi, Zara prepared for a confrontation that would determine not just Khalil's fate, but the kind of person she would become with her newfound power. She had inherited more than money from Esther Wanjiku. She had inherited the responsibility to use strength wisely, to protect what mattered, and to ensure that her choices honored the sacrifices of those who had fought to give her this opportunity. Tomorrow, she would find out if she was worthy of that inheritance. The warehouse on Industrial Road looked exactly like every crime movie Zara had ever seen. Corrugated metal walls, broken windows, pools of light from ancient fluorescent fixtures that hummed like angry insects. 3 black SUVs were parked outside, their tinted windows reflecting the orange glow of sodium streetlights. At 11:58 p.m., Zara's own convoy arrived. 2 security vehicles flanking the armored sedan that Joyce had insisted she travel in. Remember, Joyce's voice crackled through the earpiece hidden beneath Zara's hair. You're not here to negotiate. You're here to dictate terms. These people understand power, not sympathy. Zara stepped out of the sedan, wearing a black business suit that had been tailored that afternoon. Her posture radiating the confidence that $50 million and excellent legal advice could provide. Behind her, 4 private security personnel took positions around the entrance, their presence obvious and intentional. Inside the warehouse, Khalil sat in the same metal chair from the video, but now he looked worse. More bruises, his suit jacket torn, his eyes hollow with the particular exhaustion that came from prolonged fear. Around him stood 5 men in expensive casual wear, the kind of people who looked like successful businessmen until you noticed the way they moved, the bulges under their jackets, the calculated coldness in their eyes. The apparent leader was a man in his 50s with graying hair and the kind of tan that came from years of Mediterranean sun. He approached Zara with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, extending his hand as if they were meeting at a cocktail party. "Mrs. Al-Rashid," he said in accented English, "thank you for coming. I am Rashad Habib. I believe you know why we're here." "It's Mrs. Mwangi," Zara corrected, not taking his offered hand. "And yes, I know exactly why we're here. The question is whether you understand who you're dealing with." Rashad's eyebrows raised slightly at her tone, but his smile remained fixed. "Of course, you're the fortunate woman who recently inherited a substantial fortune from a relative. Congratulations on your good luck." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Zara replied evenly. "My great-aunt chose me specifically because she believed I would use her legacy responsibly. That includes protecting it from people who think they can intimidate me into paying debts I didn't incur." She walked closer, to Khalil, studying his face without emotion. "You look terrible," she observed clinically. "But I suppose that's what happens when you make promises you can't keep to people you can't afford to disappoint." Khalil's eyes pleaded with her, but Zara felt nothing. The man sitting in that chair was a stranger who happened to share some history with her. He wasn't her husband, wasn't Amira's father in any meaningful sense, wasn't anyone whose problems automatically became her responsibility. "Mrs. Mwangi," Rashad interrupted, "perhaps we should discuss the business at hand. Your former husband owes our organization $8 million. Given your recent change in circumstances, settling this debt would be trivial for you." "Would it?" Zara turned to face him fully. "Let me ask you something, Mr. Habib. Do you have children?" The question clearly caught him off guard. Yes. 2 sons and a daughter. And if one of your children made foolish business decisions and borrowed money from dangerous people, would you expect your neighbors to pay their debts simply because they had the ability to do so? That's different. You were married to a man who abandoned me while I was pregnant and disappeared for 7 years without a word. A man who never bothered to discover whether his child lived or died, whether I survived or died in poverty. A man who only reappeared when he needed money. Zara's voice remained calm, conversational, but everyone in the warehouse could feel the steel beneath it. So let me be very clear about something, Mr. Habib. Khalil Al-Rashid is not my husband. He is not my responsibility. His debts are not my debts, his problems are not my problems, and his life or death is not my concern. The silence that followed was thick with tension. One of Rashad's men whispered something in Arabic, and Rashad's expression hardened. "Mrs. Mwangi, I think you misunderstand the situation. We're not asking for charity. We're explaining reality. Your former husband owes us money. You have money. These problems can be resolved simply, or they can become complicated." Complicated. How? Well, for instance, it would be unfortunate if the international business community learned that the new head of Wanjiku Textiles allowed a man to be tortured and killed rather than pay a relatively small amount to save his life. Bad publicity can be very damaging to business relationships. Zara nodded thoughtfully, as if considering his words. "You're right. Publicity can be very damaging, which is why I brought this." She pulled out her phone and showed him the screen. On it was a live video feed being broadcast to multiple social media platforms and news outlets. The feed showed the interior of the warehouse, clearly capturing Rashad's face and his threats. This conversation is being streamed live to approximately 50,000 viewers, including journalists from the BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, and several major African news networks. The Kenyan authorities are also monitoring this feed in real time. Rashad's face went pale as he realized the implications. "You're recording this?" "I'm broadcasting it. There's a difference. Right now, viewers around the world are watching a Syrian criminal organization attempt to extort money from a Kenyan businesswoman by threatening violence. I wonder how that will affect your legitimate business interests in Dubai and London." She tilted the phone slightly to ensure the camera captured Khalil clearly. "They're also seeing the current condition of Khalil Al-Rashid, who was kidnapped and beaten to pressure me into paying his debts. I'm sure international law enforcement agencies are taking notes." One of Rashad's men spoke urgently in Arabic, clearly agitated by this development. Rashad listened, then turned back to Zara with forced calm. "Mrs. Mwangi, there's no need for this kind of publicity. We can resolve this matter quietly, professionally." "Can we?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've kidnapped someone and are trying to extort money from me through threats of violence. How exactly do you resolve that quietly?" She walked closer to Rashad, close enough that the phone's camera captured both their faces clearly. "Here's what's going to happen, Mr. Habib. You're going to release Khalil immediately. You're going to forget that he ever owed you money. You're going to return to Syria or Dubai or wherever you came from, and you're going to forget that I exist. Why would we do that? Because the alternative is that this video goes viral. Your faces become known to every law enforcement agency in 3 continents, and your legitimate businesses suddenly find themselves under intense scrutiny from financial regulators who don't like kidnappers and extortionists." She paused, letting the threat sink in. "But more importantly, you're going to do it because I'm not someone who can be intimidated. I'm someone who survived 7 years of homelessness, with a child who built a life from nothing, who inherited an empire and intends to protect it. I'm someone who has resources you can't imagine and principles you clearly don't understand." Rashad looked around the warehouse, clearly calculating odds and options. His men were nervous. The live broadcast had changed the entire dynamic of the confrontation, and the confident woman standing before him bore no resemblance to the desperate wife they had expected to find. "What guarantee do we have that this matter ends here?" he asked finally. "You have my word," Zara replied, "but you also have something more valuable, my complete indifference to your continued existence. I don't want revenge, Mr. Habib. I don't want to destroy your businesses or have you arrested. I simply want you to leave my family alone and never contact me again." She gestured toward Khalil. "Take your loss on this investment and move on." Consider it the cost of learning not to threaten people who are more powerful than you assumed. The standoff continued for several long minutes, the warehouse filled with the tension of armed men trying to find a face-saving exit from a situation that had spiraled beyond their control. Finally, Rashid nodded to his men. "Cut him loose," he said in English, clearly intending for the broadcast audience to hear his cooperation. Two of his men freed Khalil from the chair, and he staggered toward Zara on unsteady legs. She watched him approach, but made no move to help him, no gesture of comfort or support. "Thank you," he whispered when he reached her side. "Zara, I know this doesn't fix anything between us, but—" "It doesn't fix anything," she agreed. "And there is no us to fix." She pulled out an envelope from her jacket and handed it to him. Inside is a cashier's check for $50,000 and documents for a new identity. There's also a one-way ticket to Vancouver, Canada, where you have no connections and no history. Khalil stared at the envelope as if it contained a snake. "This is your choice, Khalil. Take the money, take the new identity, disappear to Canada and start over as someone else. Or stay in the Middle East and hope that Mr. Habib's organization is more forgiving than I am." What about Amira? What about being a father to her? For the first time since entering the warehouse, Zara's composure cracked slightly. "You gave up the right to be her father when you abandoned her before she was born. You confirmed that choice when you sat in my boardroom yesterday and asked for money before asking about your daughter." She stepped closer to him, lowering her voice so the microphone wouldn't pick up her words. "Amira is happy, Khalil. She's secure, loved, and building a life without the shadow of an absent father hanging over her. Don't destroy that because you suddenly feel guilty about your choices." Khalil looked from the envelope to Zara to the exit, his face cycling through emotions too complex to name. "If I take this," he said finally, "I'll never see either of you again. That's the point. And if I don't, then you leave here with nothing. And whatever happens next happens without my involvement or assistance." The choice was brutal in its simplicity, and Zara could see him struggling with the finality of it. But she also knew that some people were only capable of making the right decision when all other options had been eliminated. "Will you tell her about me someday?" he asked. "When she's older, I'll tell her that her father was someone who made mistakes and paid for them. I'll tell her that he loved her enough to stay away rather than hurt her with his problems. Whether that's true or not is up to you." Khalil nodded slowly, understanding that this was the closest thing to redemption he was likely to receive. He took the envelope, straightened his torn jacket, and walked toward the exit without looking back. As he reached the door, Zara called out one final time, "Khalil!" He turned. "For what it's worth, I hope you find something in Canada that makes you happy. Just find it far away from us." After he disappeared into the night, Rashid approached Zara one final time. "This was an expensive misunderstanding," he said. "No," Zara replied, ending the live broadcast and putting her phone away. "This was an education. You learned that some people can't be intimidated. I learned that the power to protect what matters is the only power that actually matters." As she walked toward the exit, flanked by her security team, Zara felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. For 7 years, some part of her had been afraid that Khalil would return, that he would try to claim Amira or disrupt the life they had built together. Now she knew he was gone forever, not because she had driven him away, but because he had chosen to stay away. In the end, that was the only choice that could give them both peace. 3 months later, Zara stood in the same boardroom where she had first confronted Khalil, but now the space had been transformed. The walls displayed children's artwork from the company's expanded education programs. The conference table was covered with plans for new textile cooperatives across East Africa, and through the windows, construction crews were building a new wing that would house a medical clinic for the community. Amira sat in a corner of the room, working on homework from her new school, occasionally looking up to ask her mother questions about geography or mathematics. She had adapted to their new life with the resilience of children, but more importantly, she had retained the joy and security that had carried her through their hardest years. "Mrs. Mwangi," Margaret said, reviewing the quarterly reports, "the foundation programs have exceeded all projected outcomes. The microfinance initiative has helped 200 women start their own businesses. The educational scholarships have placed 60 students in universities, and the healthcare programs have served over 3,000 families. And the business itself? Profits are up 37% from last year. It turns out that when you treat people well and invest in communities, everyone benefits." Zara smiled, thinking about Esther's letter and her great-aunt's belief that strength without wisdom was just another form of bullying. She had learned to use her power not to control others, but to create opportunities for people to control their own destinies. Her phone buzzed with a message from Joyce. "FYI, Khalil Al-Rashid officially changed his name and citizenship in Canada last month. As far as the legal system is concerned, that person no longer exists." Zara read the message, then deleted it without replying. Some chapters in life needed to be closed completely before new ones could truly begin. "Ma'am," Amira said, looking up from her homework, "my teacher wants to know if you can come speak to our class about business and helping people." "What would you like me to tell them?" Amira considered the question with the seriousness of a 6-year-old who had learned that the world could be both difficult and beautiful. "Tell them that sometimes good things happen to people who deserve them," she said finally, "and tell them that when good things happen to you, you should use them to make good things happen for other people too." Zara looked at her daughter, this wise, compassionate child who had emerged from years of hardship with her empathy intact, and realized that Esther's real legacy wasn't the money or the businesses or even the social programs. It was the knowledge that true wealth came from having the power to lift others up and the wisdom to use that power responsibly. For the first time in her adult life, Zara Mwangi was exactly where she belonged, with exactly the family she had chosen, building exactly the kind of legacy that would honor both the past and the future. And somewhere in Canada, a man with a new name was learning to live with the consequences of the choices that had brought them all to this moment. But that was his story to write now. This one belonged to Zara and Amira, and it was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.